Welcome back to the deep dive from Reformed Thinking. This is where we break down essential source material, turning dense research into, we hope, clear and actionable knowledge.
And today, the source material is, well, it's a big one. It's one of the most famous pieces of American theological writing.
It really is. We're looking at Jonathan Edwards' iconic 1741 sermon, Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God.
A sermon that's famous for being fearsome, but when you actually study the text, you see it's so much more than that.
That's right. It's not just rhetorical fire and brimstone.
No, not at all. It's a carefully, meticulously architected theological argument. A systematic case, point by point.
And that system is what we're after today. That's our mission. We want to understand the engine that's driving this sermon.
What's the logic behind the terror?
Exactly. The source material notes that it was preached during the Great Awakening and was famous for the remarkable impressions on many of the hearers. But before we get to the effects, we have to get the mechanics.
We have to.
So the core question for us is this. What did Edwards assert about the condition of the unconverted? And, how did his specific Reformed theological framework shape that terrifying message?
And that's a deep question. This isn't just a simple summary. To get it, we really have to see how he builds his case on very specific theological reasoning.
Okay, so where do we start?
I think we need two main parts for this deep dive. First, we have to set the stage. The historical and theological backdrop is critical.
His views on grace, the will, all of that.
All of that. And then, once that's clear, we can move to part two. Edwards' precise, systematic argument for why the wicked remain out of hell for any single moment.
It's all about that sovereign restraint.
It's all about the sovereign restraint of God.
All right, let's set the stage.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Edwards' career in Northampton, Massachusetts. He's a young guy, graduates from Yale very early, works as a tutor for a bit.
And then in 1726, he goes back home in a sense. He returns to Northampton to assist his grandfather, who was a huge figure in his own right.
Solomon Stoddard.
The Solomon Stoddard. And then just 3 years later, in 1729, Stoddard dies, and Edwards takes over as the lead pastor.
And this isn't a smooth, easy transition, theologically speaking.
Not at all. This really sets up the core battleground of Edwards' entire early ministry. He's stepping into a system his own grandfather built, and he believes it's fundamentally flawed.
The issue is church membership, specifically who could take the Lord's Supper.
Exactly. Stoddard had championed a practice that was even called Stoddardianism that really loosened the requirements for coming to the table.
How loose are we talking? What was the actual policy?
Well, Stoddard saw the Lord's Supper as a means of regeneration. That's the key phrase.
A means of regeneration, so not something you do because you're already a believer.
Precisely. His view was that if you were a person of good moral standing, living an outwardly upright life, you could participate.
And that participation, the act itself, could be the very instrument God used to grant you special grace.
Right, so church membership wasn't based on a credible profession of faith or an inward spiritual transformation. It was based on your visible outward morality.
And Edwards comes in and sees this as, what, a major problem?
A catastrophic problem. It moves the focus away from the absolute necessity of a known internal work of the Holy Spirit.
It sort of puts the power back into human hands, suggesting you can prepare yourself or do something to get saved.
That's the danger he saw. And this is where Edwards really digs in his heels. He starts stressing man's complete passivity in the work of redemption. He's entirely dependent on God.
We see that in his 1731 sermon, God glorified in the work of redemption.
We do. In that sermon, he argues that regeneration is an act where man is totally passive. There's nothing you could do to initiate it or contribute to it.
So if Stoddard was saying, come to the table, prepare yourself, and you might get converted, Edwards is saying what?
Edwards is saying the only reliable measure of having received regeneration is what happens after.
The soul's spontaneous, overwhelming attraction to the holiness and beauty of God.
Yes. It's not about just behaving better. It's about a fundamental change in what you love, what you delight in. It's an experience of joy in divine things for their own sake.
And this whole doctrinal debate is happening right as the Great Awakening is starting to surge.
The timing is incredible. He preaches Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God at Enfield on July 8, 1741, which is right in the thick of this massive, widespread revival.
And the sources say the sermon was famous for its spiritual effects, those remarkable impressions on many of the hearers.
We should probably pause on that phrase, remarkable impressions. It doesn't just mean people felt thoughtful or, a little emotional.
Right. This wasn't just quiet contemplation.
No. At the height of the awakening, these impressions were often intense physical manifestations.
So people crying out.
Crying out, shrieking, fainting from an agonizing conviction of their sin, or, on the other side, bursting out with this overwhelming, joyous assurance of salvation. It was a very visible, very emotional phenomenon.
And that visible emotion, that created a whole new set of problems for pro-revival guys like Edwards.
It created huge tension because you had the old light critics, the more skeptical rationalist ministers, and they were just dismissing all of this as enthusiasm.
Just dangerous emotional delusion, fleeting feelings with no real biblical or rational basis.
Exactly. So Edwards found himself in a difficult position. He needed a sermon that could move the affections, yes, but it also had to satisfy the intellect.
He had to show there was a deep, logical reason for this terror and this joy.
He had to demonstrate, using solid Reformed doctrine, why the unconverted must feel this kind of dread, and why true conversion, though it's a supernatural event, was the only logical, sane response to the reality of divine justice.
So to build that case, he first has to define what tools, if any, the unconverted person actually has.
Right. And this brings us to his really famous distinction between the two types of grace. He lays this out in a divine and supernatural light.
Common grace versus special grace.
That distinction is the absolute linchpin of the entire argument in Sinners. It draws a hard line between what's naturally possible and what is supernaturally necessary. Okay, so let's break that down. What's common grace?
Common grace, for Edwards, is what allows an unregenerate person to function in the world with some degree of morality and rationality. It acts on the mind.
It assists the natural human faculties.
Yes. It's what allows someone to read the Bible and understand the doctrines intellectually. It allows them to be kind to their neighbor, to show restraint, even to pray.
So it explains all the things that look outwardly religious but aren't saving?
Precisely. It enables speculation. It can restrain the worst kinds of wickedness in society. It is useful for this life, but it cannot save.
Because for salvation, you need special grace.
Which is an entirely different order of operation. It's exclusive to the saints, to true believers. And it doesn't just act on the mind, it acts directly on the heart.
It's a new supernatural principle that flows into the soul.
And it restores the human faculties to their original design, to love and delight in God. He has that great illustration he uses to explain this, the one about honey.
Ah, yes. The difference between hearing about sweetness and actually tasting it.
Tell us about that.
An unregenerate mind, which is aided only by common grace, can have a speculative sense of God's beauty. It can hear a description of the sweetness of honey and rationally agree, yes, that sounds pleasant.
They can understand the concept of sweetness.
I can understand the concept, but only the sanctified person, the one who has received special grace, attains the true, experienced sense of it. They have the spiritual taste of the honey.
Without that spiritual taste, without that actual delight in who God is, any religious feeling is it's just speculation. It falls short.
It's insufficient for salvation because it's not a genuine love for God for his own sake. It's just an intellectual appreciation of an idea.
And this distinction, then, it has to lead directly into his arguments against Arminianism, right?
It's a collision course.
Because if salvation requires the supernatural taste that a person can't generate on their own, then the whole Arminian idea of a free, self-determining will must be wrong.
It has to be. Edwards spent a lot of his later career fighting Arminianism, which was becoming really popular. It put the final decision for salvation on the individual's inherent free will.
The idea that the will is free, sort of indifferent, able to choose equally between good and evil.
Edwards completely rejected that. He didn't believe the fallen will possessed that kind of liberty. And he used the faculty psychology of his day, borrowing from John Locke, to structure his argument.
How did that work? What was his model of the soul?
He argued that the pre-fall human soul had two main motivational forces. First, self-love, which is natural. And second, disinterested benevolence.
Disinterested benevolence, what's that?
It's the ability to love God and your neighbor purely for their own sake, not for what you get out of it. And this benevolence is what kept the will properly aimed at the highest good, which is God himself.
Okay, so Adam had both self-love and this benevolence. What happened at the fall?
According to Edwards, when Adam sinned, God withdrew that supernatural inclination. He removed benevolence from human nature.
He took it away.
He took it away.
So, if benevolence is gone, what's left to drive the will?
Only self-love. And the implication of that is just devastating for the idea of a free will.
because human nature is now fundamentally controlled by self-love.
Which means all of our affections, all our desires, and most critically, the will itself, are now inclined toward inferior, selfish, or self-centered ends.
So even when an unconverted person does something that looks moral or good,
Edwards would trace it back to a motivation of self-regard, maybe a desire for a good reputation or a fear of punishment or a hope for some kind of reward. The will is not free because it's chained by its own strongest inclination.
which is always its own corrupted, self-serving nature.
The will is always determined by the strongest motive present to the mind. And for the fallen person, the strongest motive is always the inferior, selfish one.
So the whole Arminian idea of a free will that can just choose God without any prior supernatural intervention?
For Edwards, that's a sheer illusion. It's impossible. The unconverted cannot save themselves because their internal nature is fundamentally ruinous and aimed away from God.
And that premise, that inescapable reality, sets the stage for the entire sermon.
It's the foundation for everything that follows.
Okay, so if the human will is bound by corruption and needs a special grace that the unconverted don't have, then their situation is, well, it's perilous.
It's extremely perilous. And this is where Edwards transitions from the deep theology to the direct application. He chooses his text, Deuteronomy 32, verse 35. Their foot haul Eliade in due time.
And who is he aiming this text at? It's not just a general statement about humanity.
No, he's very careful about this. He directs the threat not at, pagans or atheists. He aims it at the wicked, unbelieving Israelites.
The visible people of God.
The visible people of God. People who lived under the means of grace. They went to the temple. They offered sacrifices. They practiced the outward morality.
But they were still void of counsel. They lacked that genuine spiritual transformation.
Right. And this makes the message so profoundly personal for his New England congregation. He's looking at people who look and act religious, and he's telling them, this text is about you. You are the ones in danger.
That must have been shocking.
It had to be. He then takes that phrase, their foot haul Olide, and he breaks it down into 4 specific conditions about their destruction. He's setting up the immediate reality of their danger.
The first condition is constant exposure.
Yes. He says they stand in slippery places, and he's pulling that directly from Psalm 73. It means they have no firm footing, no stability, no grip whatsoever.
They're perpetually exposed to falling.
Always. At every single moment. And it requires a continuous, active, outside effort just to keep them upright for 1 more second.
Okay, so they're always exposed. The second point is suddenness.
Because the ground is slippery, the fall, when it comes, will be completely unexpected.
You can't see it coming.
You can't foresee if you'll be standing or falling in the very next moment. He quotes that psalm again. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places. Thou corroded them down into destruction utterly. The speed of it makes all human vigilance totally pointless.
The third point, and this goes right back to his doctrine of the will, is self-initiation.
This is a crucial connection. They fall entirely of themselves.
What does that mean?
It means they don't need an outside force to push them. They don't need some accidental shove or a big earthquake.
They just fall on their own.
Their own weight is enough. The immense downward tending weight of their own sinful, unregenerate nature is sufficient to cast them into the pit, given the slippery ground they're already on.
So their destruction is something they earn and, in a sense, bring about themselves.
It is intrinsically self-willed and self-earned. Their nature tends toward ruin.
Which raises the obvious question. If their nature is ruinous and their footing is slippery, why haven't they fallen already?
And that is his 4th point, sovereign timing.
The only reason they're still standing.
The only reason is that God's appointed time has not come. Edwards asserts that the moment God releases his restraining hold, the inevitable consequence, that intrinsic downward force of their own sin, will immediately carry them into destruction.
Like letting go of a heavy rock you were holding up.
Exactly like that. The fall is immediate and natural once the restraint is gone.
This systematic breakdown of the text, it leads him right to his central, terrifying thesis statement for the whole sermon.
It does. His core observation is this. There is nothing that keeps wicked man at any one moment out of hell but the mere pleasure of God.
The mere pleasure of God. That phrase, mere, must have been so unsettling. What did he mean by God's arbitrary will?
He was using arbitrary in its older theological sense. It means unconstrained, decided purely by sovereign power. It's a will that is not limited by any external obligation.
So God isn't bound by anything to keep them safe.
Nothing. The preservation of the wicked doesn't depend on their good health, their moral efforts, the prayers of their family, or any kind of covenantal promise. It depends only and absolutely on the uncovenanted, unobligated volition of God.
So an unconverted person's continued existence is just.
If
It's an act of sheer, terrifying contingency.
That's a perfect way to put it. Their life isn't protected by law or justice or promise. It's safeguarded only by an unexplained, temporary act of divine forbearance.
And Edwards is showing that the natural man is already at war with God, already deserving of hell right now.
Yes, presently. So any moment of continued life is an act of pure grace, that God is not in any way bound to continue for another second.
And this observation becomes the lens for the next section of the sermon.
It does. He then launches into his 10 systematic proofs, which are designed to dismantle every single false sense of security a natural man might be clinging to.
Okay, let's unpack this list. These 10 considerations are really the rhetorical engine of the whole sermon.
They are. He moves logically from God's attributes down to man's failures, and he makes sure there is no safe place to hide outside of special grace.
Let's start with the first four, which are all focused on God's internal relationship to sin and justice.
The first proof is simple but foundational. Power is sufficient.
God is able to do it.
He lacks zero power to cast wicked men into hell instantly. This is vital, because if God were somehow limited or constrained by man's strength, the threat would be meaningless.
And this is where he uses those stunning analogies to show the absolute gap between the creature and the creator.
Yes, the wicked are like great heaps of light chaff before the whirlwind, or like dry stubble before a raging fire.
The point is their powerlessness.
Their absolute powerlessness. He says it is as easy for God to do this as it is for us to crush a worm crawling on the ground or to singe a single slender thread. The ease of it is the point.
God doesn't need to exert himself.
Not at all. And even if all unconverted men on earth combine their strength, though hand join in hand, as he says, their collective power is nothing against omnipotence. It's less than a piece of dry stubble.
Okay, so God can do it easily. That's proof one. What's proof two?
Proof two is that justice demands it.
Not only can God do it, his very character as a just God requires him to do it.
Exactly. Divine justice makes no objection to their immediate damnation. In fact, it's the opposite. Justice calls aloud for an infinite punishment for their sins.
Why an infinite punishment?
Because their sin is committed against a being of infinite majesty and holiness. The punishment has to fit the crime, and the crime is against an infinite God.
So justice is personified here as an executioner ready to strike.
It is. He calls the wicked grapes of Sodom and says, justice looks at them and says, cut it down, why cumbereth it the ground?
So the only thing holding back this sword of divine justice
is the uncovenanted arbitrary hand of mercy. It's this cosmic balancing act. On one side, you have justice demanding infinite payment. On the other, you have only God's current unowed volition holding the scales level for this one moment.
Which leads to proof three. They are already under sentence.
Yes. This clarifies their legal status. They aren't just candidates for judgment in the future. They are legally condemned right now.
He quotes John 3:18. He that believes not is condemned already.
This is a critical point in Reformed theology. The condemnation is immediate upon the sin. The unconverted man, Edwards says, properly belongs to hell. That is his place. From thence he is.
Wow. So that completely flips the script. Judgment isn't some far-off future event. It's a present reality.
It is. Their time on earth is just a temporary suspension of a sentence that has already been handed down in the divine court.
A stay of execution.
A stay of execution, granted by arbitrary fiat. It means hell is their native country, their natural state, and every day of their life is lived as a fugitive from their rightful legal location. The tension is exponential.
And this flows right into proof 4. They are current objects of wrath.
Right. This counters the comfortable idea that God is sort of passive or unconcerned about your sin until the day you die.
That his anger is dormant.
Edwards insists that's not true. He says the unconverted are, in this present moment, the objects of the very same anger that's being expressed in the torments of hell.
He even says God might be more angry with some people on earth who are living at ease than with some already in hell.
He does, because they're adding to their sin every day while enjoying God's common grace. The imagery he uses here is all about the active, immediate state of this divine fury.
The pit is prepared, the fire is ready.
The flames now rage and glow. The glittering sword is wet and held over them. The lack of an immediate strike isn't because God is unprepared or his anger is sleeping. It's purely his choice to restrain his hand from swinging an already sharpened blade.
So after establishing that God's own character and justice demand their ruin, Edwards moves on to show that all the other forces, internal and external, are also ready for their destruction.
He closes every door of escape, starting with proof 5, Satan's readiness.
How does he frame this?
He says Satan views the unconverted as his property, his goods, and he's quoting Luke's gospel there. The devils are constantly watching them.
He compares them to greedy, hungry lions.
Yes, just waiting. They are being actively restrained by God's hands, and if God were to withdraw that hand for just one moment, they would fly upon their poor souls.
So there's this spiritual battlefield, and the only thing protecting the soul from this ancient enemy is God's will.
His singular volition. Hell opens its mouth wide, ready to swallow them up instantly if that protection is removed.
The danger then turns inward, with proof 6, internal hellish principles.
Yes, the source of destruction isn't just external. It's intrinsic to the fallen soul itself. And this might be the most psychologically terrifying point of the whole 10.
Why is that?
Because he argues that hellish principles, things like corruption and enmity against God, they already reign inside carnal men. They are the very seeds of hellfire.
So hell is already inside them, in seed form.
Exactly. Sin, by its very nature, is destructive. He describes the corruption in the human heart as being immoderate and boundless in his fury.
And what happens if God lifts his restraint on that internal corruption?
He says it's like fire pent up. If God's restraining hand were lifted, this internal chaos would immediately erupt into a blaze. It would turn the soul into a fiery oven, consuming it from within.
So the unconverted person is literally carrying the fuel and the match for their own destruction inside them at all times.
At all times. They don't need to be sent to hell. Hell is already dormant within their own nature, just waiting for God to let it ignite.
That's a staggering thought, and this leads to the failure of all our external self-made protections, which is proof 7, no security in health.
A healthy body, a strong constitution, the fact that you don't see any immediate means of death around you, none of that provides any security at all.
He says men are constantly on the very brink of eternity, no matter what their physical state is.
And this is where he brings in that powerful metaphor of the rotten covering.
Tell us about that.
He says unconverted men are walking over the pit of hell on a rotten covering. And that covering is filled with innumerable weak spots that they can't see.
So at any moment, they could just fall through.
At any moment. Death's arrows fly unseen at noonday. God has, he says, innumerable and inconceivable ways of ending their life without needing a miracle or even stepping outside the normal course of his providence. A healthy man who feels safe is standing on nothing but a paper-thin sheet over an inferno.
And if health is no defense, then neither is human intelligence. Proof 8. Prudence fails.
Exactly. Your own prudence, your worldly caution, your shrewd financial or life planning, none of it can secure you for a single moment.
Not even the care of your family and friends.
None of it. Because if human foresight and wisdom actually provided security, then wise and shrewd people wouldn't die unexpectedly. But they do.
He quotes Ecclesiastes, "How dieth the wise man as the fool?"
The point is that God is sovereign over the means of death. He can find the cracks in the armor of the wisest, most careful person. So all the confidence we place in our own worldly caution is it's just another layer of delusion.
Which brings us to the logical conclusion in proof 9. All schemes of escape are vain.
Right. Every natural man who hears about the threat of hell, he flatters himself. He thinks that his specific scheme, his private effort, his resolution to be better tomorrow, that will be the thing that allows him to escape.
But Edwards dismisses all of that as nothing but a shadow.
He argues that the huge majority of people who have died under the same means of grace in churches just like theirs are now in hell. And if you could talk to them, what would they say?
They'd say they had plans to escape, too.
They had elaborate schemes, but destruction came suddenly. Death outwitted me, they'd say. God's wrath was too quick for me. Their self-contrived plans turned out to be thin air and empty shadows.
There is no clever way to sidestep divine justice.
None. And that leads to the final, ultimate point that seals the argument. Proof 10, no promise of preservation.
What does he mean by that?
God is under zero obligation to keep any natural man out of hell for even one moment.
Because all the promises in the Bible,
All promises of deliverance, of preservation, of help, they are reserved for those who are in the covenant of grace. And you only enter that covenant through Christ.
So if a person has no interest in Christ, they have no claim on any of God's promises.
None whatsoever. So even if the unconverted man performs religious duties, goes to church, prays, tries to repent, as long as he has not truly believed in Christ, God is not bound by any prior agreement or obligation to hold him up.
The natural man's prayers have no security attached to them.
That's right. So the summary is just inescapable. The unconverted stand condemned, they are hated by a just God, and they are resting on absolutely nothing but the uncovenanted, arbitrary patience of an incensed God. Every single supposed defense has been systematically stripped away.
So with that logical case for immediate peril completely closed, Edwards then shifts his focus. He moves from why you're in danger to what that danger actually is.
He does, and this is where the rhetoric and the imagery become incredibly visceral. He wants to make the reality of God's anger completely unavoidable. It's designed to terrify the affections, not just inform the mind.
We have to start with the most famous image of all, the abhorrence, the spider.
Yes. He says God holds the sinner over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire.
The sinner is viewed as worthy of nothing but being cast into the fire.
And this isn't just dislike or disappointment, it's an intense, visceral disgust. He says the sinner is 10,000 times so abominable in God's holy sight as the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours.
And the choice of a spider is so critical there. In the great chain of being, insects were at the very bottom. They were seen as vile, worthless creatures.
So by comparing the unconverted person to a spider, Edwards is placing them in the absolute lowest category of being, worthy only of immediate contempt and destruction. It communicates total insignificance and loathsomeness in the eyes of infinite purity.
And he reinforces this with another image, the spider's web.
Right. The unconverted are heavy as lead, he says. They are constantly tending downwards because of the sheer weight of their sin.
And their supposed defenses, their health, their morality.
They're all compared to a spider's web that would have absolutely no chance of stopping a falling rock. It's ridiculously inadequate.
So again, it comes back to the failure of all human defenses against the overwhelming weight of their own sin.
It does. And then he adds this cosmic dimension to it with the image of the groaning creation. The whole universe is alienated from the sinner.
How so?
The entire created world, the sun, the earth, the air, it groans under the burden of the unconverted person's corruption.
Because they're being forced to serve sinful purposes.
Exactly. They have to unwillingly subserve these sinful goals, and it's against their nature. The world, Edward says, would literally spew you out if God didn't mercifully subject it to this burden.
So the unconverted person has no friendly corner in the entire cosmos. Everything is against them.
Everything. Then he moves to the preparation for judgment with the bow and arrow.
The imagery here is so tense.
It is. The bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow is already on the string. Justice is straining the bow with all its might, and only the mere pleasure of an angry God is keeping that arrow for one more moment from being made drunk with your blood.
It's an image of imminent release. It's ready to fly at any second.
Instantaneous and fatal. And finally, there's the metaphor of the dammed waters. This captures the cumulative nature of God's restrained anger.
So the anger is building up over time.
Like great waters behind a dam. The longer the stream is stopped, the higher the water rises, the more pressure builds, and the mightier its course will be when it's finally released.
And because judgment hasn't been executed yet, guilt is constantly increasing.
Yes, they are treasuring up wrath, as Paul says in Romans. If God just withdraws his hand from that floodgate, the accumulated fiery floods will rush forth with omnipotent power. And no strength, not human, not even devilish, can withstand it.
It's not enough to show the fury, though. He has to define the quality of this wrath. First he asks, whose wrath is it?
And the answer is that it's the wrath of the infinite God. This is the point he stresses above all others.
The fear of an earthly king is great, but it's nothing compared to this.
Nothing. The most powerful human ruler is just a feeble, despicable worm of the dust. All the kings of the earth before God are as grasshoppers. He tells them to fear the one who, after killing the body, hath power to cast into hell. The infinite nature of God determines the infinite magnitude of the punishment.
Second, he talks about the fierceness of the wrath.
He pulls this from the book of Revelation, talking about the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. This is anger on a whole different level.
It's as if omnipotence itself is enraged.
That's the idea. It's the ultimate manifestation of God's almighty attribute in the act of punishing. The poor worm who suffers this will sink into an inexpressible, inconceivable depth of misery.
And this fierce execution will happen without pity.
Zero pity. Once they are in hell, all compassion is gone. The mercy they are experiencing right now, the mercy that's keeping them alive, will be completely withdrawn. God's eye will not spare them.
He won't moderate the punishment at all.
Not at all. And far from pitying them, Edwards says that when they cry out in their agony, God will laugh and mock. He will tread them under his feet like mire in the streets, crushing their blood so it stains his garments. It's a horrific image of divine contempt for the impenitent rebel.
It's overwhelming. But why? Why this absolute unmitigated display? This leads to the third characteristic, the purpose of display.
Because God's design is kind of theological theater for the entire universe. He intends to show all of creation, angels and men, two things. First, how excellent his love is for the saved, and second, how terrible his wrath is for the lost.
So the suffering of the damned is not just punishment, it's instructional.
It's a spectacular, eternal demonstration of divine sovereignty. The infinite might, majesty, and terribleness of God will be magnified in the ineffable strength of their torments.
And he says the damned will suffer in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb.
Yes, the glorified inhabitants of heaven will look upon this awful spectacle in order to adore God's great power. The suffering becomes an eternal sermon that increases the glory of God and the awe of the elect.
Which leads, inevitably, to the final crushing point, everlasting duration.
It is everlasting wrath. If one moment of this is dreadful, the prospect of an infinite duration of it is meant to shatter the soul's ability to even comprehend it.
He talks about a long forever, a boundless duration.
They will have to wrestle with this merciless vengeance for millions of ages, and yet they will know with perfect, despairing certainty that all of that time is but point to what remains. There is no end. There is no hope of it ever stopping.
Because the crime was against an infinite God, so the sentence must also be infinite.
That is the terrible logic of it.
So after systematically taking away every piece of human security and painting this picture of inescapable, eternal terror, Edwards finally pivots. He turns to the immediate application for the people sitting right there in that meeting house.
Yes, the danger is not a future tense thing. It is happening now. The unconverted man is hanging over hell by that one slender thread, and the flames of divine wrath are flashing all around it, ready to burn it apart.
And since they have no interest in a mediator, there's nothing else for them to hold on to.
Nothing at all. And he directly confronts their natural tendency to deny this. He calls it a current delusion.
He says, you, the person listening, you are probably not sensible of this danger. You're looking at your good health, your careful plans for your life.
And he's just spent the whole sermon proving that those things are worthless defenses. He calls them nothing but thin air and empty shadows.
He makes the threat just stunningly immediate. He says that destruction came suddenly upon people who are now gone, right when they were saying peace and safety.
And then he delivers the line that must have just silenced the room. He says it would be no wonder if some of the people hearing him speak right now were in hell before tomorrow morning.
He personalizes the horror even more by talking about the case of the dead.
He says, think about the people you knew, the ones who sat with you in this church last week, who seemed just as likely to be alive today as you are. Where are they now?
They are now in extreme misery and perfect despair.
And they are crying out, wishing for just one day's opportunity that the people listening still have. He's turning the present moment into this unique final window of chance before they join the despairing dead.
But this sermon can't end on pure terror. It has to end with an appeal.
It does, and he shifts the tone. He uses the religious fervor of the Great Awakening itself as the reason for hope. He says this is a day of mercy.
This is a high watermark of God's activity.
Exactly. Christ has flung the door of mercy wide open, and he's calling and crying to poor sinners. This season is unique because so many people are flocking to him and pressing into the kingdom of God.
Including people who were just recently in the same miserable condition as the people he's talking to.
Yes. The implication is that God is pouring out his special grace in an unusual way. So to reject Christ now, when grace is so available, is an even greater sin.
And he then aims pointed warnings at specific groups in the congregation who might be hesitating.
First, he talks to the old. He warns them their case is extremely dangerous. After a lifetime of neglect, their guilt and the hardness of their hearts are extremely great.
He even says they're generally passed over and left in this current revival.
It's a sorrowful but stark warning. He tells them they need to wake thoroughly out of sleep immediately before it's too late.
Then he turns to the young.
And he warns them not to waste this precious season. He says if you neglect this opportunity now, while you see so many others your own age flocking to Christ, you'll soon end up just like those old people who wasted their youth and are now in a dreadful pass in blindness and hardness.
And then he speaks directly to the children.
He appeals to them by asking if they will be content to be children of the devil when so many other children around them are becoming the holy and happy children of the King of Kings. The peer pressure, if you will, is theological and intense.
The final warning ties it all back to the urgency of this specific moment in the revival.
Right. To neglect this opportunity now, during this time, it increases the danger that you'll be given up to hardness of heart and blindness of mind.
Edwards believed that God might be hastily gathering in his elect.
And if you reject the Spirit's work now, when the Spirit is working so visibly all around you, you risk being permanently blinded. You might be cursed to eternally remember this season of grace that you refused.
This is the moment, he says, when the axe is in an extraordinary manner laid at the root of the trees.
The opportunity, just like the danger, is immediate. It's now or potentially never.
And so the final instruction is simple and urgent. Flee.
Let everyone fly out of Sodom. Haste and escape for your lives. Look not behind you. Escape to the mountain, lest ye be consumed.
So when you analyze Edwards' sermons systematically like this, it becomes so clear that Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God is a masterpiece of theological precision. It's not just raw emotional manipulation. It's not at all. He establishes the immediate, constant peril of the unconverted, held up only by God's arbitrary will. And he supports that single point with meticulous arguments about man's total corruption, the bondage of the will, and God's irresistible justice and power.
What really stands out is how he used that systematic, almost scientific logic to validate a spiritual experience.
Right. He presented a reasoned, coherent case for why divine judgment isn't some random event, but the inevitable consequence of a just God releasing a corrupted nature that already deserves and intrinsically tends toward its own ruin. It's a striking, unflinching illustration of the Calvinistic view on human depravity and the ultimate supremacy of divine sovereignty.
It really is.
So that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Given Edwards' a rigorous assertion that every natural man's effort for self-preservation, their moral striving, their good health, their careful prudence, even their prayers outside of Christ, is nothing but thin air and empty shadows, what does it mean to view salvation entirely through the lens of singular sovereign mercy?
When all human contrivance is eliminated, when you can't contribute anything at all, the reliance has to shift entirely to an act of God alone. That is the central, enduring question that Edwards left his listeners with, and it's certainly one worth holding on to.